Um, Today is week 10, and we are going to be covering how to make a JSON API to the beginning. But first off, some logistics. How many of you guys actually got the email about updating your profile on our website? And how many of you guys have actually done that? Okay, that's good, because if you don't do that and we can't figure out what your name is by your GitHub handle, you might not pass this class, and that would be no bueno. Also today, in case you haven't read the Project 2 guidelines, and hopefully you did, that you're supposed to check in with your TA every week, and this could be either in person or through email. And if your TA is here today, you could just check in with them after class and just let them know how your project is going. And if you still don't have a group, that's really, really bad. So come see us as soon as possible if that is the case. Okay, first of all, wait, how many of you guys have ever worked with an API before? How many of you guys have built an API before? Okay, hopefully this will be a very useful lesson in figure out how to make other applications work with your Rails application that you made. So can anybody tell me what an API is, or what does it stand for? Yeah. Exactly, it stands for Application Program Interface. What does that mean, though?
It's a way by which you JSON endpoints by which pretty much anybody who has access to the API is authorized to use the API, can send requests to your API and get back data from the API, or send data to the API and get back.
Exactly, that's exactly what it is. So I'm just gonna read off this slide. So yeah, API, like what he said was, it stands for Application Program Interface, and what it is it's a way to interact with a certain piece of software. And for our very specific case, we're going to learn how to interact with our Rails application. And usually when you have an API, like for those of you who work with the API, you probably learned, you probably read some documentation that a company or whatever website gave you, and it said, oh, if you make a request to this endpoint with this data, you'll get back a certain subset of information. And we'll be learning how to do that. Does anybody here know what JSON is? Yes, you. Exactly. It's basically a way, it's just a way to kind of encode data and transfer data between applications. Does anybody know what JSON stands for? Okay, someone said it, JavaScript object notation. So basically there's only two types of objects in JSON. There are one, arrays, and the two are key value pairs, or you can think of them as like hashes or dictionaries. And within the type of values that you can have in a JSON object, they could either be strings, numbers, and when I say numbers, it could either be an integer or a float, booleans, and null values. And it's one of the many ways that you could interact with an API by sending JSON data. Are there any questions so far? All right, cool. Another thing we're gonna show in this live coding is namespaces. So when your Rails application gets larger and larger, you'll have more models, more controllers. What namespacing allows you to do is organize your controllers within folders, and it also allows in your routes to find controllers based off of the folders that they are subsetted in. An example I'm going to show you is, let's say in your application, I don't know if you can see me highlight. So in your application, let's say you have one set of controllers for people who access your website through their browser, right? There's your users controller, your quits controller, stuff like that, right? But then you want to have another set of controllers just for people that want to access your JSON API, or like people that want to gather your data, but for their Android iOS application. You could separate that part of your application by creating a namespace. So what you would do is under your controllers folder, you'd make something like /API, or you create an API folder. And let's say you want versioning in your API, which is very common practice. You will put a version number for the API. So under your API, you might have the version 1, or like the first set of controllers you've ever made. And then finally / your JSON controller. So if you, basically on the next slide, there's gonna be an image of this namespace. And what it will represent is request going to whatever your base URL is, /API/v1/users. And this is a really dark image on that screen, but if you want to go back and reference this, I'll show this during the live coding, but if you want to go back to reference this, it's going to be in the slides. What it says on this first line is namespace :API do, and within that I have namespace :v1 do. And finally, resources users, which you guys have seen before. Another thing that we're going to go over is how we basically send back JSON. Do any of you remember well, you should remember the render method. We've talked about this before. Every time you go to a controller action, like for example, index, right? You implicitly call render. And what render does is says, oh, give me data back in a format that could be read by something. Its default is HTML, and it will make the assumption that you will have like a file. For example, if you had index, it will assume that you also have an index.html.erb, and it will implicitly call render on that, parse the index.html.erb file, and return you a straight HTML file for the requesting browser. But if you want to, instead of rendering HTML, just send back JSON data, what you would do in this case is in your controller, you just do render, call render, and pass in an option that's JSON, and pass in the JSON, what you want to be turned into a JSON format. So in this one line here, render JSON @users, this is saying, okay, whatever is stored in the @users variable, turn it into a JSON string and send it back to whatever's requesting it. One more or two more notes about live coding. We will disable the CSRF token, which basically prevents these type of security attacks called cross-site request forgery. And it's something that started appearing like 2007 or something, where you could write JavaScript inside, like it happens in forums actually. Like, I don't know if you visited forums back in 2007, but people could put in JavaScript inside a forum post, and when your browser renders it, your browser will run the JavaScript and it'll make a request, but the request is coming from your browser, so it has access to your cookies or tokens, right? And then it could do really bad stuff under your identity, which is something that Rails naturally prevents, but we'll turn it off just to show you how the API works. And another thing is when you're working with APIs, your server logs are your friends. You basically will look at your parameters a lot. Any questions before we get started? All right. Okay. So first off, I'm gonna just start from scratch, Rails new baseline bash API. And this will quickly create us a new Rails application. CD JSON API. And I'm only gonna work with one model, right? One model and one controller for this lecture. And it's just going to be the simple users. model. So I'm going to Rails G model user, give it a name, which is a string, and an email, which is a string. Let the Rails generator do its magic, create a migration file, and make db migrate. Would it be better if I zoomed out a little bit, or is this still a good size? Zoom out a little bit. Okay, why aren't you? Okay. Let's see. Okay. So we created the user model, migrated it. So generally, when people make APIs, they scope all their controllers under an API and a version number. So that is what we're going to do. I'm going to, I'm going to open my text editor outside here, but I'll move that out of the way first. And I'm going to, I can actually just do this through my text editor. So I have my JSON API, right? I have my app folder, my controllers. And let's say I want to make a folder that will contain all the controllers that will ever be my API. I'll just create an API folder. And within that folder, let's say this is like the first iteration of my application. I'll give it a v1. Whoops, that's a file, not a folder. Delete that. And new folder, v1. Okay. Next, I'm going to create a controller for my users, or ways to access my user. So I'm going to create a users underscore controller, RB. I'm going to get a users controller. Users controller, and make it inherit from application controller find class end. So what was the general action if I wanted to get all the users in my database? What was it called? Somebody? Yeah. Yeah, users at all. But what I was looking for was like the general name of the action. Exactly, yeah, index, right? Define index. So I'll make the assumption that this index method will return all my users. And to find all the users in my database, I would call user.all. Now, usually I just want to store user.all into a variable. I'll call it users, and I'll set that equal to users.all. Now, what I said in the slides was that normally this will guess that I do have a users folder in my views and that there's going to be an index.html.erb, right? But this is a JSON API. So what I'm going to say is instead of rendering, letting it default render like an HTML, I'm going to tell it specifically that you're going to render JSON. And it's going to be the JSON format of users. Okay. Next thing I need to do is route this controller method. So in my config, routes.rb file, I will delete all this middle stuff and do namespace, which is me telling that telling my routes file that look in the API folder for this namespace do, and since I also have a v1 folder, I'm going to say namespace :v1 do. And it'll say, if there's a request to /API/v1, go to my API folders, v1 folder, and then try to find the controller from here. And what I'm going to say is resources users to say, okay, that there's going to be a user controller in there, and only allow the index method to happen. So I created my routes. There's one thing I forgot to do. When you scope a controller under a namespace, you have to put the namespace in front of the class. So this would be API : v1 : users controller. That's something useful to remember. So in theory, okay. There's an R. Catch. Is this still spelled right now? Yes. Hopefully. Okay. If it doesn't work, I will embarrass myself, but that's okay. I'll pop in my Rails console just to create users to see data. So I get an index response and will be empty. Name, Howard Chen, email, h@b.com. And I'll do the same thing, but second user, Sam, s@lao.com. Okay, so if I do user.all, I get this array, which is the two users that are in my database. These are all my users. Okay, here's a question. How many of you guys have used curl before? Yeah, or how about you in the gray? I think that's gray, but yeah. What does curl do?
What is what?
Curl do.
Oh, there's something else.
Okay. Yes.
So it can let you make HTTP requests.
Exactly. So just for the sake of the example, this a curl request is exactly what he said. It's just you make HTTP requests to a server or any application, right? So it's a command line tool, curl, and then to actually ping websites, you have to pass it a -l flag. And an example I'm going to use is http://railsdecal.com. This is a website. So if I do curl -l http railsdecal.com, I'm going to actually fire a get request to the Rails decal website. And this is what your browser actually does. It fires get requests, right? And it retrieves the response back, which it assumes is an HTML response. And I know this seems like a massive web with text, but this is actually all the HTML that's generated on our website. For example, like right here it says the class time is Thursdays 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. This is all the JavaScript that's on our website and stuff. This is how your browser actually works. It just, when you go to a URL, it fires a request and it just gets back this like text file pretty much, and it parses through it, and then it figures out how to render and show you like it in like a beautiful manner, I'd say. So, but what I'm trying to curl instead is my localhost. So I'll do curl localhost 3000. I know why, because localhost 3000 hasn't started, so I'm just going to do Rails as, that's what it says up there. Yay, I started something on localhost 3000. I'm going to make a curl request. This is what I get back, is the HTML for the basic page. And that rendered is this. I'm pretty much just getting back this page. But if I curl request localhost 3000 /API/v1/users, this is what I get back. This string right here. It says, first there's a square bracket, it tells me it's an array, and inside this array is this object. And it has key value pairs 1, name Howard Chen, email, blah, 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 and also has a second value, which is Sam. this is how applications communicate through JSON. They go to an endpoint. You basically ask, okay, give me something back from this endpoint. And the endpoint, I specifically told that endpoint, hey, render all the user information in JSON format. I got that back. And now I could use this to kind of populate like any sort of application I'm making. Do you have any questions so far? Yeah. An endpoint is basically, think about it as just a URL that you hit. Yeah. Okay. So in pure JSON format, this is actually like, I mean, it's just a piece of information for now, but what I actually did yesterday was I quickly made an Android application just to show it being used. So I don't think I could actually zoom into the code, but I'm going to tell you what is happening. Wait, how many of you guys actually have developed in iOS or Android before? And how many of you guys actually like made requests to a server? Okay, so for those of you who've done this, I did it really hastily, but this is how Android applications and iOS applications like get data from a web server. And I'll just quickly tell you about the code I wrote, I guess, if you can't see it. Basically, I direct them to localhost 3000/API/v1, and I create a request, right? And that request it will fire. And once I get it back, what I'm telling it to do is grab the names that I get back from the request, separate the names by commas, and put it on the text view. So open up my Android emulator, and then it says all users, oh crap, okay, all users. And on this button, I said that if I click this button, I'll fire a request. Also open up, wait, that's on a different screen, okay. So I'll just put that as the top of my terminal. If I hit all users, it fires a request, and now it gets back 2 names. I know it's really hard to see because I can't really zoom in on this, but it says Howard, Chen, and Sam. And if you look at my server, it received the request /API/v1/users. It received a GET request for that, and I was able to render it in JSON. And I told my Android application, hey, expect to get JSON back, and parse it and then shove it into my text view. Any questions so far? Yeah.
So you also want to have a front end to say the question of maybe standard web applications along with having JSON API. And you want the standard URL to be like localhost 3000 URL /users, and you want to display all the users in standard HTML, CSS, presented. And you also wanted another endpoint which API v1 users index or whatever. So would that be possible? Like, have both going on together, like having an API as well as standard
Yes, there is. So there are 2 ways to do this. Like one, to have does your standard web app and your API. So if I wanted the regular, the HTML version or like the web application version to show all my users, I would have a users controller out in my controllers folder, not scoped in API and v1. That's one way to do it. Another way to do it is you could create a single users controller at the topmost level, and you could basically read what a request is asking for, actually. So when you send a request, a lot of requests contains information like, oh, I want back this in HTML format or XML or JSON. And you could have a Rails endpoint, or basically, one of the URLs handle each case, and it'll send back a different type. Yeah, those are 2 possible ways to do it. Okay. So now we have a way to gather information, right? But we might now want a way to create information, or like allow us to create users. So since this is a JSON API, we don't need a new method, because in Rails, new just gets us the form to create our user, but we don't need to get a form if this is just a JSON API. Like the form's done on our iOS application or our Android application. We need a way to, or we just need an endpoint that receives data, and with the data it receives, it will parse through that data and insert that user into our database. So that method is create. And what I'm going to do is say user equals user.new user params. And I haven't defined user params yet, but I will define it right after. What I'm going to say is, okay, I'll just define it right now. There's a private method, define user underscore params. And what it'll do is it'll take the param hash, grab the user value, the value that's scoped into user, and permit the key value pairs name and email. Okay. So when this first line happens, basically I'll look through my params and create a Ruby object that's a user in memory. I'm going to do user.save to save the user and put it in the database. And finally, I'm going to do the same thing I did before on top, render JSON : user. The last thing I need to do that I put in my notes is to disable the CSRF token. And what the CSRF token does is prevents people that shouldn't be making post requests to a certain URL. It prevents them from it prevents people who shouldn't be making post requests to a certain URL from making those requests, or it'll stop the request midway and prevent any action. Normally, you would also write your version of kind of authenticating that this Android app belongs to like a certain user, but we're not going to worry about that and just focus on how to create a user. So I'm going to write skip before filter, verify, authenticity token. Yeah, I'm actually really bad at spelling, like terribly bad. Without like the modern spell checker, it would be over. So verify authenticity token. So basically, usually abstracted away from you in the application controller, your controller will naturally run this verify authenticity token method, which will say, hey, make sure that this request came from like the correct user and make sure it's safe. But we're just going to skip it to allow us to create. And I'm going to show you another curl request. So, crap. So instead of me typing it out, I know what I have in my history somewhere. Okay, I guess not. Wait, really? Curl. Okay, it's not in my recent history. So instead of typing it, I'll just copy and paste it from somewhere. Post request JSON, post request JSON curl. Do this and copy this. It's a curl request. -v stands for verbose, so it's gonna show me my packet. Yeah, it's kind of long. This is why I don't want to actually type it out. Okay, so scroll out and tell you what each part means. So curl -v means verbose. Verbose says, right after I run this, tell me what was in the request I sent, except application/JSON. This header tells the web server that the data I'm encoding right now is in JSON format. There are multiple ways to encode data. JSON's only one of them, and it's just one of the easiest ones I can present. So, and it's the most common one I use, so that's why I went with this example. So I told the web server that the string of data I'm going to send is a JSON one, so parse it as JSON. Content type application.json. I might have flipped one of them. One of them tells the server I'm sending you JSON, and the other one says return me back my response in JSON. I might have flipped them, but it's going to be okay. It'll still work. Dash X tells passing dash X post tells it, okay, this curl request, instead of giving me a get request, give me a post request. And for my user, I don't have first name. The only thing I do have is name. I'll put, let's say my name's Henry, and my email is email@email.com. And I don't need to actually delete the rest of this because it will get filtered out. If I make this post request, here is what the verbose says. Okay. I did not do something. Okay, I know what's wrong, but so this is actually me getting back an HTML page because there is an error in my request. And the reason, can anybody guess why actually my request didn't work? I forgot to do something, yeah. No, I did not put the route. That's exactly what it is. So in my routes.rb, I didn't tell my Rails router that I had a route for that. So I'm going to say, hey, I actually do have a route for create. And I'm going to send this request again. Connection. And I am forgetting something. It's probably easy to read my logs. Oh, I know what's wrong. I forgot the V in V1. So I was just hitting the wrong URL. Try again. Okay, there we go. Okay, so dash V says dash verbose. This is basically it telling me what kind of request I sent. I sent one to localhost at port 3000. It was a post request, type HTTP1. I told it that that I want to receive JSON, except it's telling the server I want my data back in JSON format. That's how you can overload an endpoint to return either XML, HTML, or JSON. Your request will say I want this back in a certain format. Content type, which means like the data I'm going to pass you is in JSON format, which was like that whole array stuff, or the brackets with the user information in it. And this is just more headers that you'll see. And finally, when I make a request, I told my Rails server that that after I save the user, I'm just going to send back the JSON version of the new user I created. And that's what I have here. This is the third user I made. I misspelled Henry, I put Henty, and email is email@email. The rest of this information is correct. So if I go back to my Android application, I'll hit back. I'll hit all users again, and now I've got this third guy right here. And the convenient thing about JSON endpoints isn't the fact that I could make a curl request to it, but it's me actually making a request from something. Oh, crap. Okay. I'm just going to reopen the application. The important thing is I could make post requests with my Android application. So I created this little form on my Android application, and I could, in it, it only asked me for a name. I'll put the name hi. The email actually don't have validation, so I'm going to put a random string. And then when I click this create user button, what my Android application will now do is read each of these text inputs, put them in a user JSON, a key value pair, which is name to name, email to email, and put that all into the user's hash. I told my Android application, now take those hashes and turn it to a JSON string. And once I hit create user, it should fire that request, and now I have this guy named Hi. I know it's really hard to see, but if you're watching the webcast, Hi will appear. And if you look at what just happened in your server, when I said your server is your best friend, your server will debug stuff. Well, not debug stuff for you, but it's a good place to look for debugging. It's that the JSON request I sent is going to pop up here, and I said, oh, I made a post request to API/v1/users. I said that within this user, its email is GHJJJH, and its name is Hi. Any questions about this? Or it doesn't have to be a specific thing. Anything in this lecture that's confusing? Anything about this class in general? Logistics questions, anything like that? Because that, just so you know, that was actually, yeah.
So you're developing so once you do the web app version, you can do this same endpoints you're making.
Yeah, exactly. So it's just, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like you make a website, right? Like, yeah, let's say you start a company, you start making your product, and you realize, okay, I want to now start hitting iOS and Android users, right? They need those, these users when they, or basically for your engineers to write this application, they need a way to access the customer's data, like their names, emails, or like if you're making Twitter, how to access my quits. What you would have to do is on your web application, create JSON endpoints that that take GET requests so the users could gather their information, and take POST requests so they could actually like push up information, like write a quit while they're on their phone. Yeah. Any more questions? This is just a relatively short lecture because it's kind of contained topic, and yeah, that's yeah, that's everything I have for today's lecture. Are you sure no logistical questions, anything like that? Not a single one. All right. Let's see. I don't even know where my video thing went. Okay, here we go.